the newsagents.
These uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should.
It is hard to think of a more depressing way to announce the biggest piece of political news the country can expect to hear than standing in the pouring rain with the Blair 97 anthem like verbal graffiti drowning you out at 10 Downing Street.
But beyond the optics, this news could not be bigger. All year we have speculated, we have wondered, we have tried to find out when the general election is going to be. On July the 4th, this country is going to have a choice. Rishi Sunak himself said it, between the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer. And we're going to be with you every step of the way.
Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's Lewis.
It's Emily.
And it's John in the Central European Bureau.
And before we get on to election news, we have to say happy birthday to our Central European correspondent, who manages to be out of the country, but importantly, with Mike.
How is the election going down in Middle Europe, John? Just let's get that first.
In Prague, they're talking about little else in Wenceslas Square, I can tell you. Honestly, they said, Rishi Sunak, who'd have thought it would have been July? There you are.
Not you, clearly.
No. So Rishi Sunak's, even his own massive announcement was preempted, I guess by us, but by others, by broadcasters, who all started to learn the news about 2 hours ago, I guess, that this date, July the 4th, was the one in the calendar for the next general election. And yet Rishi Sunak had to come out, I mean, an extraordinary decision in some ways, to come out and be in the pouring rain, very much a sort of lone character at the podium. Let's just listen to what he said.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War.
I have to say, I have never seen a less auspicious start to a general election campaign for any Prime Minister or party leader. And I have to say, I almost felt sorry for Sunak. I felt sorry for him that his team had allowed this speculation to build all day, rather than just say announcing it first thing in the morning like Theresa May did in 2017, which means that you don't get the pranksters out there outside the gates playing things can only get better. All day I thought to myself, he can't announce it today, surely, not in the rain. It's due to rain, forecast to rain all day in London. It has. At the very least, give him an umbrella. They didn't. Instead, we have the sight of what should be your first big moment to define your campaign, to define your terms. And instead, all anybody is going to see tonight on the 6 o'clock news and on the 10 o'clock news is a sight of Rishi Sunak looking like a drowned rat. Yeah. He's saying, we've got a plan. They can't even plan an umbrella. This is just absolutely crazy optics.
Yeah.
Well, let me just stick with the weather metaphor, because, I mean, aside from it being pouring with rain, I mean, the decision-making, presumably they felt in Downing Street, this is as good as it is going to get. And we had slightly good news on the inflation figures, although it hadn't fallen as much as some economists had thought it might. There is some progress on the Rwanda policy, but, you know, will any plane be in the air before July the 4th? No. And you think, what is the good news? You've been 20 points behind consistently. Now, nothing is shifting. Why do you think it is going to shift between now, May the 22nd, and July the 4th? And that, you can only think, they just thought, actually, to quote the Dream song, things were going to get worse.
Yeah. I think you have to go to the beginning of Rishi Sunak's speech to understand the narrative that he was trying to offer the public. And that was essentially by reminding us that he'd first been introduced in Downing Street 4 years ago when he was Chancellor. And he talked about his act of giving people furlough during the COVID pandemic. And I think that speaks volumes in a way that the best thing he can point to doing as a politician was not even when he was leading the country. It was not as Prime Minister. It was before anyone had really met him in the middle of the pandemic when he stepped in to sort of sort out the furlough and the jobs and all the rest of it. And I guess there are two ways of looking at this now. Either you say, those economic figures, as John said, those economic figures, the inflation figures, the possibility of flights to Rwanda taking off are as good as it's going to be for him. Or else you flip it on its head and say, he probably hated every day, and he was probably getting to a point where he was not enjoying it. He realised that there wasn't going to be a big uplift. It's almost impossible to see how you overturn a 20% lead for Labour. Yes, he can close that gap, but it's very difficult to see how staying in that job for another 6 months would have really benefited him or his party or his family, quite frankly. And there's a point at which you think, is this just a massive shrug? Is he just saying, OK, sod it, I'm out?
I think that's exactly right. I think that by announcing this today, I think Rishi Sunak has given up. I think he's concluded that there is no real hope or prospect of his being Prime Minister after the election, whether that election comes in July or whether it comes in November. And I say that just because there was always, we've spoken all year about when the election might be, and there are always two broad scenarios. There was one, go in May, and you go early, you go during the local election period, that gives you a little bit of a bump. You forestall any prospect of more boats arriving and so on. You forestall the prospect of things getting worse. Or you go long, and you hope that inflation comes down, which it quite literally did today. You hope the Bank of England starts to reduce interest rates, or at least gives the indication that it will do so. That is also possible. And you just hope that things start to turn a corner, or that Starmer collapses. There was never a case for July. I mean, honestly, spare a thought for the hundreds of Conservative councillors who lost their seats, who probably wouldn't have lost their seats if the general election had been in May. Consider Andy Street. He probably wouldn't have lost the West Midlands mayoralty. I'll tell you one thing, Rishi Sunak, not beloved by his party already, he has not done his own relationship with his party, and indeed his activists who've got to go and knock on doors for him now, any favours whatsoever by choosing July rather than May.
I just had one Tory MP on the phone to me saying it's a show. Now, I mean, you could argue that they've been saying that on and off for months and months and months. But I think the idea that you didn't go for the obvious one, which did make sense, which we were sort of half prepped for, and you didn't play it long to give people the chance then to sort of think about their seats and their position.
And 6 more paychecks or 7 more paychecks for the MPs.
Paychecks, and there is the sound of sort of June holidays crashing all around, but that's another thing. I guess the other thing that we should think about really is what this means for Labour and for Starmer. And my sense is that this is probably coming at quite an auspicious time for him. He can feel that if last week was almost the de facto launch of the general election before we had the date, he got his pledges out. Labour were primed for an election in May. They were expecting it. They've been sort of ahead of ready. And if you think that they know that the gap will close, I mean, it almost certainly will close in some shape or form, then what do they gain by sort of stretching it out? They might as well have a shorter one, right? And I was calling around some of the Labour people, and I think we can assume that Starmer knew about this, certainly before Prime Minister's questions today, because he didn't mention it at all, which kind of tells you that he knew something was coming. He didn't have to push him. It was quite a sort of a sombre, sober, gracious Prime Minister's questions, which I think told you that Keir Starmer is already starting to think about, his appearance in a prime ministerial way rather than, pushing, sort of nudging Rishi Sunak at the jugular. But this was what the Leader of the Opposition recorded today.
It's time for change. Britain is a great and proud country. But after 14 years under the Tories, nothing seems to work anymore. Public services crumbling, ambulances that don't come, families weighed down by higher mortgage rates, antisocial behaviour on our high streets. The list goes on and on. Political chaos feeding decline, feeding chaos, feeding decline.
Okay, well, I would say political messaging, good, music bed accompanying it, bloody awful. I mean, given that Labour have had plenty of time to think about what they will do when the announcement comes. I also thought that the kind of, for the second time, we had a reference to the anthem of '97 with, Starmer saying things can only get worse. And then you go to Rishi Sunak's own 5 pledges, promises about the progress that he wanted to be judged by at a general election. So yeah, halved inflation, tick. Growing the economy, not really that much. Reducing debt, again, not really that much, particularly given the pledges that have been made over national insurance and raising defence spending. Cutting NHS waiting lists, no. And as for stopping small boats, record numbers of small boats have been arriving on UK shores in the first 5 months of this year. So again, this is what he wanted to be judged by. It's not a great record.
Well, Starmer has said what their campaign slogan is going to be, and it's a single word: change. And fundamentally, this is what this election is going to be. I mean, elections are always basically better the devil you know elections or change elections. That's basically almost all of them boil down to that. And everything we kind of know from the polling and the electorate suggests that Labour is completely right to pitch it in that way. The one thing I can't quite get my head around as well, I mean, just in terms of kind of thinking about the date and going back to what we were talking about, the idea that Sunak has just given up on this, it's worth bearing in mind that, like, the Conservative Party has got scores and scores of seats they haven't even got candidates for yet. The Labour Party has basically completed all of their selections, apart from some safe seats that they know about retirements that are going to happen, and they're basically going to parachute some of their favoured candidates in. Tory Party's been struggling to get candidates. CCHQ had been saying for months that they still need more time to actually get the campaign ready, and yet here we are, Conservative Party launching into an election campaign, and in lots and lots of seats they don't even have a candidate.
It's also not a particularly auspicious date for the Conservatives. July, I think the last general election was the Attlee one, which really was about change. It was the post World War II one in 45, which brought Attlee to power with, I think, a majority of about more than 147, something like that, on July the 5th. But I think your point about change is really important, because Starmer clearly will have done his homework on this, and the Ipsos polling on this says that 73% of the country think it's time for change. Now, I think that's a very wide-ranging definition. It doesn't mean that 73% of the country think that Keir Starmer should be Prime Minister, or even that Labour should be in power. But you are playing to the idea that whatever you have at the moment isn't working. And if you've got 7 out of 10 people saying we have got to do something about that, then that works to Starmer and the slogans. I also think it's worth looking at their net satisfaction rates, because Labour is 21 points ahead. Sunak himself is on minus 55 in terms of the net satisfaction, a sort of personal rating. It is the worst ever for Prime Minister was Major and Sunak himself back in April. They were both on minus 59. So, I mean, in Sunak's mind, maybe you go, oh, I am improving. My net satisfaction is getting better because I'm no longer minus 59, I'm minus 55. But you are not where popular leaders are. Starmer is not where popular leaders are. Blair was at, 22%, and Starmer is still, minus 18, but that's sort of shrinking as well.
But I'm sorry, right? I know I keep returning to this, but I can't describe how pissed off I would be if I were a Conservative MP right now, right? Not least because I had basically been nudge, nudge, wink, wink by all the whips and so on, told that it's going to be the autumn, don't worry, you can plan your lives around it, whatever. But also because if I'm your average Tory MP and I'm thinking I'm going to try and keep my seat and I'm facing an uphill battle, what is day one of the election campaign going to be about? And this is the thing, when we were talking about it last night, we were saying on the podcast earlier, I just thought it couldn't possibly be today. Why? Because day one of the election campaign tomorrow is going to be about net migration, with the net migration figures coming out, and they are going to be bad. And that is going to be day one of this campaign. What on earth, what kind of grid is this? What kind of planning is this? What kind of internal party planning is this? Honestly, the whole thing is crazy.
Look, if Rishi Sunak had been the most gifted politician in history, with the wiliness of a Lyndon B. Johnson and the communication skills of a Tony Blair or Bill Clinton, he was still going to struggle, given the chaos of the previous years, given Liz Truss, given Boris Johnson, proroguing a parliament, Partygate. You just go on and on and on, and the list of what has happened and unfolded over these past 14 years. But he wasn't. He was probably, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, as high as he should have ever got. He is not an agile, gifted politician. And then there is that one other thing that nags at the back of my mind, and we have talked about it before on the podcast, which is, maybe Rishi Sunak will choose July because if he loses the election, then maybe he could get his kids into school in California, where an awful lot of people where an awful lot of people think that he's much more his natural home, and the school year will be starting just after Labor Day in the US, and happy days, we're out of here.
The other grid question, since you mentioned grids, is of course the Euros. I mean, we will be in the middle of a football tournament all the way through the election campaign. So if you're planning your TV debates, 16th of June we play Serbia, 20th of June we play Denmark, 25th of June we play Slovenia, then...
No, don't watch that. Watch the debate. The debate's on.
OK, so here's the point.
Goodall, you sado.
I'm just going to say one thing.
It'll be me and Starmer and Sunak's family. That's about it.
Well, this will give you an idea. Some of our team, no names mentioned, went off to the pub whilst we were waiting for the announcement.
Shocking.
And they sat
I'm looking at you
watching
through the glass.
the Rishi Sunak announcement, the Drown Rat announcement outside Downing Street. Nobody else in the pub looked up. So there is a moment that we have to recognise. We are still talking to ourselves and all of you, we hope. But how many people will, oh, Harold, quick, it's the TV debates, it's that Starmer, Rishi. I don't know, they will.
Well, the Scots Tory MPs are pissed off about something else, which is that Scottish school holidays start at the end of June. And people are going to be on holiday in Scotland.
So for a man who's saying it's all about holding the United Kingdom together, he's not got off to a flying start, has he? Yeah.
No, indeed. I mean, we should sort of talk about what literally happens next, which is now Parliament is still in place. And there were these weird rumours doing the rounds earlier about, you guessed it, letters going in to the chairman of the 1922 committee because Tory MPs are so annoyed that they might try and have a last-minute leadership
I don't believe
struggle.
That, do you?
Well, I don't believe it, but I do believe that some letters will have gone in. I don't think they will reach a critical mass, but I mean, who knows? We could have one last bit of Tory chaos before the election. But anyway, there'll be this thing that's called the wash-up, where any last-minute kind of emergency legislation will get through Parliament in a couple of days. Parliament will be dissolved on May the 30th. Then we'll be into a general election campaign because you need 25 working days. And then there's going to be a debate now about what sort of debates happen between the parties, if they happen, what form that they will take. Both sides have said they want it to work.
But before we even get to that, and I think this is critical, because the one thing that we have, been so aware of all week has been the blood inquiry and the compensation and the payouts. And there is a chance that now that the general election has been called, the Victims and Prisoners Bill, which sets up the Infected Blood Compensation Authority, may not be included in the wash-up. Can you imagine having got to this point, having sat through
all
whatever it was,
sanctimony.
30 years, 40 years of fight, and then hearing that actually, this had slightly, got in the way of things?
Well, talking about inquiries, shall I tell you one person's vote that Sunak has probably won today?
Paula Venables.
Paula Venables.
And Simon Case, who's meant to be at the COVID inquiry tomorrow.
Paula Venables.
She lucked out.
She has lucked out to the max. She would have been on the top of every single news bulletin tonight, and she'll probably be, best case scenario, very back of the back half.
Yeah.
And finally, yeah.
I keep having visions of the memes that went round about downfall, of the last days in the bunker, which kind of were endlessly parodied. And we
should be careful because they were Nazis, John. So, I mean, let's kind of step around that delicately.
Hitler would never have come out in the rain like that.
I'm not comparing it to Berlin. I am not comparing him to Hitler or anyone else, to Himmler or Goebbels. I am just saying that those memes that were done whenever there was a crisis of what it was like in the bunker in the final days, I have visions of that in Downing Street, of what has unfolded today and the crowning glory of Rishi Sunak soaked through to his Prada-suited skin. What a mess.
Well, that's exactly right, in terms of the memes. Because that meme, Emily just said about no one really noticing, that's true. That meme, and they're going to be, Labour Party will do it, but there will be so many organic ones. The memes of Sunak, absolutely drenched to his bare bones.
Barely able to make himself heard.
Yeah, barely able to make himself heard, will be everywhere, across every bit of social media within a couple of hours. And it is, like we say, go back to where we started. I cannot think of a worse start for the campaign.
But we have to say at this point, it is all to play for. And things can turn around. Well, I just mean things can turn around. And I think anyone who thinks that we know or we're predicting what will happen over the course of the next month is kidding themselves. So we will take you on the ride of your life.
Every day of the campaign.
Did that sound weird?
Well, it sounded a bit like a Drayton Manor advert or something, but it doesn't matter.
Welcome to Maitlis at Centre Parks.
Can't wait. It's going to be great.
We'll be back tomorrow. Are you back from Prague tomorrow, John?
Yeah, I'm on a hideously early flight. So will you be nice to me tomorrow?
No.
Bring birthday cake. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.